She tears you down, darling. Says you're nothing at all. She tears you down, down, down. She tears you down, but I'll pick you up.
Hey, hi, I'm Phil. This is my brother Dan. We're Brooks Brothers. You're watching computer music.
So we'll have a little look at the drums here. We've got 3 kick drums here. Well, actually, one of them's a hi-hat, so let's start with those. Just start with a very basic kick drum. It's quite punchy. It's got the right
Got a bit of boom to it as well, but not too much.
It's got the right kind of frequency that you're looking for from a main kick drum. So we've opened just a simple waves frequency analyzer to have a look at this kick drum. So you can see that this peak here is at 110 Hertz, which is around the kind of frequency range that you're looking for a drum bass kick drum. Normally it's kind of
100
between,
to 110.
Yeah, between like 90, 100 and 110. So we decided to use that, and we just did a little bit of a low cut there, just to take out any sort of booming.
But good to leave as much as you can in without it sounding too muddy or rumbly.
Yeah, and beware of some plugins that, as soon as you open them up, actually affect the low end spectrum already, because if you've got a loud signal, then some plugins can react in different ways. So just listen quite carefully and see if it's changing the sound too much. We've added another kick drum just because we felt that kick drum on its own, no matter how much we boosted it, just lacked a little bit of kind of warmth or
Bit of deepness, really,
and a bit of dirt in a way, a little bit of dirt. So we added a kind of raw kick drum, like a processed funk break kick drum.
Adds a bit of character.
Yeah, as Phil says, just adds a bit of character and makes it sound a little bit stronger. So on that kick drum, we've just compressed it slightly with a pretty sharp attack, just 0.19 milliseconds, which means that after that point, 0.19 milliseconds after the kick drum comes in, the signal's being compressed so that it sounds snappier. It's got a quick attack, so it sounds slightly snappier. And we've got a little bit of a boost there at 130, which would have been a nice little resonant peak in the kick drum, which we can bring out using this Waves EQ. And then what we've added is a hi-hat as well. So normally with low end, to get really good low end, it's important to focus on top end as well. So when you're doing stuff like kick drums, it's normally a good idea to layer them with higher sounds, just so you can control that top end element of the kick drum a lot easier.
Generally, we wouldn't use like a kick with a hi-hat in it.
Well, no.
Or if we did, roll the top end off and use like 2 split.
But this
so
is
you can
just
control.
a hi-hat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's what I mean. But
Yeah.
we wouldn't use a kick with a hi-hat in it.
No. Yeah.
We
that's
use a
it,
kick.
yeah. And a hi-hat.
A standalone kick, and then layer an extra hi-hat, so you have that control. With a lot of breaks, like it's hard to kind of, they have hi-hats or cymbals over the kick already. So I mean, you can't really, there's not much you can really do. You just have to kind of roll with the break and just use it. You don't want to really interrupt the flow of it by kind of separating it about too much.
So that's those 3 kick drums all together. And then it sounds nice and weighty, so we're happy with those. It's basically 2 kick drums and a hi-hat. The snare drums, this is our more attacky snare, sort of in the high frequency range.
No 200 Hertz or any lower end, just a tight, high, snappy snare. And then
any low end, we've been careful to EQ out to the extent where it's not clashing in any way with the lower snare that we're going to add on, basically. And yeah, I guess the important thing here is just to find a nice snappy snare for that, to help the snare cut through the mix.
nice and clean, as little resonance as possible.
So we've layered it with a processed snare. This is a snare that we've processed, like a drum machine.
Drum machine.
Done some enveloping, just to try and get a nice kind of of electronic sound that we can layer with other more funky breaky snares and sort of create a total snare sound.
It's just always a mixture between like a drum machine snare for the weight and the presence and punch, and then like a more funky break kind of snare to add the character.
Yeah, so that snare will be supplying us with the low end that we need to kind of to make the tune.
That's the weight that you hear in the club, and then the other one on top will just
help it cut through the mix and provide a sort of snappier element to the snare. So those two snares together sound like this. Sorry, they don't. They sound like this. So you can hear it's got that lower frequency range there, and it's got the higher frequency range as well.
That's actually,
yeah, that should actually be it. So then we added a sort of white noisy kind of action snare, which I think
just the tail of it really, not really much transient.
If you look at the audio shape, we've actually done a little fade in at the start, just so the start doesn't really clash with the attacks of the other snares. So that's going to sound like this.
So you're just really getting the tail from the action snare, just providing a nice kind of reverb. You want to make sure with every snare that you layer to make sure that the transients tweak the transients so they work perfectly with each other, so it's not too smacky or not too harsh, basically.
By transients he means the start of the hit, so it's like when the stick hits the drum, that's the transient sound, it's the first sound you hear. So when you're layering up snares, obviously you're layering up a lot of transients on top of each other, and you want to be careful which transients you're actually using as opposed to which ones you don't want, which
ones you want,
which snares you're using for that purpose and which snares you're using for the more longer snare sounds.
I know that when we started out making beats, we used to just layer like 10 snares on top of each other and not touch the transients, just trying to get a really fat sound, but we realised that less is more. The more you take away and the more you leave like one transient sounding snappy and one like more kind of just fading in or whatever, the easier it is to get a good, clean, fat snare sound.
Having done the snares and the kicks, now we're going to have a listen to how they sound together. Right? So, we've got a nice full sound there, covering the top end in the kick drum and the snare drum, and the bottom end of the kick drum and the bottom end of the snare drum.
Okay. All the bases covered.
Got all the bases covered, so we wouldn't normally necessarily work in this order, but we might start with a break. Sometimes we might start with kicks and snares and then add the breaks later on. Sometimes, most of the time really, we start with a break and then start layering it out with individual hits.
Either way, it's always a mixture of breaks and hits. Like I don't think we've ever released a track where it's just single hits or just...
No. We always use breaks because breaks is what... Where
just
you get that jungle drum and bass
feel.
And
you can't...
You don't want your drums to sound really hitsy and not be able to hear that live feel in the background. So
it's virtually impossible to recreate like the kind of ambience you get from a break with single hits.
Yeah, so we generally try very hard to keep the breaks as a prominent element of the drum mix. So we'll have a little